everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day. And today, Amanda, we are going to talk about deaf culture, D-E-A-F. And we're going to talk about it in part because some amazing books came into the sort room, but also because I made an amazing discovery related to the great composer, Ludwig van Beethoven. Shall we get right to it? All right. Now, you probably know, Amanda, that here in Georgia's we have a lot of sheet music. And sheet music usually sells for only a few dollars. It's sort of a dime a dozen. We've got Elvis. We've got American in Paris. We've got West Side Story. Those are more modern ones, but we also have older sheet music from the 19th century, just assorted songs. Nothing too exciting. Oftentimes the sheet music comes bound in sort of nondescript books like this. We used a term called sammelband on a previous buy day, and that's what it is. People would collect all their sheet music, put them in a binder, and then put them on their piano, and they would play. Well, I was going through a collection of otherwise nondescript sheet music from the 1850s and 1860s, I thought. All of it was in German. I thought, boy, this stuff isn't going to sell. And then I noticed some older paper, Amanda. And I realized that there were 3 original songs by Beethoven in the Sammelband of sheet music, all of which were published before 1810 in Austria by his music publisher, which is really exciting. And Beethoven at the time, well, today he's known for his symphonies and his concertos, but at the time he made money by writing popular songs for the voice and the piano. And in the age before Spotify, you'd have to go buy the actual music and bind it in your collection. Now, how these made it to America, I don't know. But we have 3 works by Beethoven. Note, first of all, this one uses the name Louis van Beethoven, which is what his name was before he changed it to Ludwig. We also have L. van Beethoven, and then eventually we have Ludwig van Beethoven. So no standardization in how he was doing it, even though these 2 are both from the same music publisher. And these are in Austria. Now, the reason you can tell these were older, or I could tell these were older, is if you look very closely, you can see the plate marks. And so this represents a different type of printing in which the whole plate was pressed down upon the paper. You can also see that the paper itself, if you hold it up to the light, which we can do here, is a higher quality paper than was used later in the 19th century. It's thicker. It's finely woven rag paper. Okay, now, what makes this particularly good, Amanda, is that this song, which was entitled in German, To Hope, was written for his young piano student by the name of Josephine, whom Beethoven scholars believe was the person that Beethoven referred to as his immortal beloved. There is a famous letter unsigned by Beethoven to somebody called the immortal beloved, and we believe it was written to Josephine. Now, as I tell you the rest of the story, I'm going to play you this song, which I have to say is really interesting because if you go to the official Beethoven.de website in Germany, they have cataloged all of Beethoven's songs with clips and with copies of the first edition. So you'll see that our sheet music here is right here listed as a first edition underneath the description, and you can play the song. So with that in the background, and with you in the mood. Now, at this time, Beethoven was already starting to lose his hearing. He would pretty much lose it completely later in life, but he was already going deaf. And he was getting piano lessons to Josephine, who was an aristocratic daughter of a very wealthy Austrian family. She actually lived and practiced piano in a castle. Now, Beethoven had no chance with Josephine. Beethoven was a commoner. He had no, I mean, he was rising up in the ranks of musicians, but this was not acceptable to Josephine's family. And they wed the young Josephine to a very rich, noble person, which is what you would have expected at the time. But then in 1804, when she was still in her young 20s and Beethoven was still teaching her piano, the older gentleman died. And Beethoven saw his chance. He could move in. He could capture Josephine's heart. All he had to do was write her a song, and he wrote her this song, To Hope. And he actually dedicated the song to her, and he mailed the song to her with the dedication, and she even wrote to her mother, oh, Beethoven's written me this wonderful song. Her mother was a little suspicious. But then a scandal happened Amanda. Somebody saw the dedication on the manuscript. They saw that Beethoven was interested in this recently widowed Josephine, and the whole family nixed the relationship, and Beethoven's heart broke. And the song is all about somebody with a broken heart. You can hear it in German. It's pretty beautiful, isn't it? That's our full excerpt. But if you want to hear a little bit more in terms of translation, and gently and softly veil the grief who torments a tender soul, O hope yet lifted up by you, the sufferer suspects that up there an angel counts his tears. And Beethoven would never marry Josephine, and sadly, he would revise this song, and when the song was published, there is no dedication. No dedication to Josephine. It is a little sad. I also like this interesting song in part because they obviously did it rather hastily, and you can see, do you see this mark on it? This is a crack in the plate, which they didn't bother to correct. So that's an original printing crack in the plate that is printing the music, and that's a sign of the first edition, which is pretty neat. Now, an amazing discovery, and it brings to mind a whole series of other books that we've been talking about that have to do with deaf culture in America. And I want to move next to a pamphlet, because in addition to sheet music, we have an awful lot of pamphlets, probably 2,000 or 3,000 pamphlets here in the collectibles room of the Scholar. And I want to talk about the first ever school that was dedicated in America for the deaf. And that was in Hartford, Connecticut. And it was founded by a gentleman named Thomas Gallaudet. And what's interesting about this early pamphlet, and all this is a sort of report about what's going on at the School for the Deaf in Hartford, but it's neat because it says a couple of things. First, it shows the earliest students who went to the academy, including Alice Cogswell. And Alice Cogswell was the student who inspired Gallaudet, who's listed as the chief instructor, to go to France to learn the methods and to learn sign language and to establish this academy, which really transformed how people thought about the deaf in American culture. It also lists the first ever deafblind teacher in American history, Laurent Clerc, who came from France with Gallaudet and who taught Alice Cogswell and many others over the course of a long career. But that's not all, because we also had a fascinating book come in, which is the biography of Laura Bridgman. There's Laura, and here's the title page. Laura was perhaps one of the more famous people in all the 19th century because she was the inspiration for the founding of another academy, this one called the Perkins Academy in Boston, which had to do with the education of the blind. And her teacher was a gentleman named Howe, who sort of proved to all the world that people like Laura could be not only be taught, but that they could learn as well as anyone else. And she rose to prominence because Howe wrote a series of scientific papers that were published in Europe, and one of them was read by Charles Dickens. And in 1842, when Charles Dickens came to America, he wanted to meet Laura, and he wrote a very large section of his book, The American Notes, all about this meeting, including the first ever biography of Laura. He said, long before I looked upon her, the help had come. Her face was radiant with intelligence and pleasure. Her hair, braided by her own hands, was bound about a head whose intellectual capacity and development were beautifully expressed in its graceful outline and its broad open brow. Her dress, arranged by herself, was a pattern of neatness and simplicity. The work she'd knitted lay beside her. Her writing book was on the desk she leaned upon. From the mournful ruin of such bereavement, there has slowly risen up this gentle, tender, guileless, grateful-hearted being. Now, what's partly interesting about that story is that American Notes was read by a family called Keller, and inspired them to reach out to the school to see if there was an instructor who could teach their daughter Helen. And the instructor they found was a woman named Anne Sullivan, who was classmates with Laura Bridgman. And Laura made for Anne Sullivan a doll. That was one of the ways that she made a little side money. Gave it to Anne Sullivan, and the first thing that Anne Sullivan gave to Helen Keller when they met was this doll. She put it in one hand, and she wrote the word doll in Helen Keller's other hand, which is a pretty remarkable story. This book is interesting because it reproduces Laura's poetry, but it also shows off examples of her handwriting. And we're going to end with an example of Helen Keller's handwriting, which is from a dedication of a book of hers that came in a little bit later. It is worth noting that Helen Keller handwriting looks fairly similar in that they were both trained by Anne Sullivan. So this is a great inscription by Helen Keller. Some people always grumbling because roses have thorns, and rejoice that thorns have roses. So there you go. Sincerely yours, Helen Keller, inspired by Lauren Bridgman, and all of which brought to prominence by the great Charles Dickens. All right, shall we end with a funny book? I think we shall. It has to do with sounds, Amanda, and it has to do with something called the art of pishing. Oh. Are you familiar with the art of pishing?
I'm not.
Well, pishing is the art of bird calling, as in psh, 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 which supposedly imitates the sound of a very common bird. Now, we're going to play, Amanda, Name That Bird Call, which I know you're excited to play. Actually, what we're going to do is, I'd like you to guess, what sound would you make if you were trying to attract a bald eagle? Yes, an American bald eagle. Ooh. What sound would you psh, 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 to get that eagle to come?
I feel like you have to screech.
Well, if you watch Stephen Colbert, you would think that. But do you know what a bald eagle actually sounds like?
No.
It sounds like this. Not the strongest sound from a mighty bird. But I learned about that in the art of pishing. You can too, for sale at the Midtown Scholar. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next Friday and every Friday at noon right here for more adventures in the world of books.